On July 13th, 1978, the president of Ford Motors got fired. This was significant because the president of the company in 1978 was Lee Iacocca, a genius salesman who introduced the world to the Ford Mustang. Lee had also posted record profits for Ford in 2 years leading up to his termination, and he looked like he was on track to lead Ford into the next era of auto manufacturing, which led economists and car buffs to ask the same question about Ford letting Iacocca go. What the hell? We've all had friends who have gotten fired out of the blue. When we ask them about it, they say things like, it was unexpected, or the boss just had it out for them, that the other workers were jealous, that they did the work of several people, but somebody had a beef with them. We comfort our friends when they get canned, but on the inside we're rolling our eyes, right? Well, when Lee Iacocca got fired, it was all true. Lee's boss was the chairman of Ford Motors, and he was the grandson of the Henry Ford. And Henry Ford II literally had it out for Lee Iacocca for being too successful and too strong of a businessman. Henry Ford II, while firing Lee, told him, quote, "Sometimes you just don't like somebody." To make matters worse, Lee was being replaced by a 28-year-old kid, the son of Henry Ford II, Edsel Ford. At 54, Lee Iacocca, a man who worked his way through engineering school and bootstrapped his way from engineer to Ford salesman to record-setting company president, was fired and replaced by a 28-year-old son of the chairman, just 10 years before retirement. If there ever was a time to throw in the towel, this was it. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-duh on the internet and get us to the juicy facts.
The phrase throwing in the towel has become so overused, it's lost its meaning. We say it to discourage friends and coworkers from quitting before things get too tough. Come on, you can't throw in the towel yet. The fight's not over. But on today's episode, we're talking about quitting. When is it a good time to quit? And statistically, how much quitting should we expect to do in our lifetime? We also want to remind everyone that throwing in the towel can be a good thing. It's a signal to stop a boxing match when your fighter is losing so badly, being beaten so thoroughly, they're not persevering anymore. They're simply being hurt. Lee Iacocca technically never quit, but he did redirect his abilities. So that's the first myth we need to bust. Myth 1, never give up. Odds be damned. We shall persevere, always and forever, even against reason, right? Myth 2, if you've mastered something, you should continue down that career path. If you've put in your 10,000 soap carving hours and you've achieved the rank of master carver, then you should persist, even past the point of soap carving being financially viable. Myth 3, in this economy, if you have a stable job, you should fight to keep it. Wait, no, you should listen to TED Talks. You should quit to pursue your creative dreams. Wait, that's not right either. You should go back to school, focus on marketable skills. Actually, we're not sure which one. But on today's episode, we'll find out.
So, Todd, you boxed, right?
I did, for many years.
Did you ever physically throw in the towel?
Yeah, I did.
So,
I just kind of gave up and knew it was hopeless.
okay. So it was an actual towel, right? Like movies haven't lied to me.
Well, when you're in the ring, you don't get to do the towel. Your cornerman throws it in.
Oh, okay.
But usually what they do, it's happened to me not in a match, but in sparring, where they said he's had enough.
Okay. And so we're not wrong on the research, right? It actually is to prevent injury, basically.
He's got no chance of winning. He's just going to get hurt.
Okay. I just want to make sure we had our facts right with that. So in your opinion, having been someone who has actually been able to, one of the rare people who can say they actually physically threw in the towel, when is it okay to quit something in life?
Well, I'm going to break it down into two categories. I hold on to love and jobs for, in my opinion, in my history, for way too long. I have a high threshold for pain.
Why love and jobs specifically? Is that something in you, your personality
That's all life is to me, is love and work. Money and work, and you work more to get more love or something like that. When's the time to quit? We'll talk about it on a job. I think when the pace and the stress and the strain is, and this process is not sustainable for very long.
Okay.
Like, I don't know much longer I can do this. This really isn't worth the money. You know, when you drive to work and you're in your car, and then you have the weight on of the world on your shoulders, like you're frozen with hopelessness, dread. You're like, I can't walk into that building. You're in the parking lot of your job. You're like, I just can't go there. That's when it's time to quit.
I really love that image. When you are stuck in the parking lot and you don't want to open that car door. That's perfect.
Paralyzed with hopelessness at a dead-end job.
Right.
I only have one regret. There's a job that I quit that I should have kept. Of all the jobs I've had, and I'm not going to embarrass myself by telling me how many I've had. But in love, I don't have any regrets. All the relationships that didn't work out, I don't look back and say, well, I wish we should have done this. The further I get out of them, I realize I should have thrown in the towel sooner and saved myself a lot of emotional and financial damage.
It's funny you say that specifically about love, because while researching this episode, I came across that over and over, and it can only really ever be anecdotal. There's not a lot of good statistics for how people feel about past relationships, but a lot of people say the same thing, that they should have quit dead-end relationships earlier. Just as sort of a bonus fact, have you ever heard of the sunk cost fallacy?
I've not.
The notion is that when we invest in something, money or time, we're more likely to keep investing into it because we feel like we owe it, like it's going to pay out eventually. If you're sitting at a slot machine, you're more likely to keep putting money in if you've already put money in.
So if you're in a relationship and you're in it 5 years, you're thinking, I've been doing this for 5 years. The benefits are coming. My reward is right around the corner. If I quit now, got all this in and I don't get anything out.
Right. The money is coming. The sunk cost fallacy works with scam artists too. They will get you to invest in something that is bogus, and then they'll ask you to invest again. They're not happy with the scam stopping or getting the initial money from you. They will come back because they know the sunk cost fallacy works. They will get you to buy in again because you don't want to lose the initial investment. So when we talk about quitting, I wish I'd written this into the episode so we could plan it out, but the sunk cost fallacy, there's a lot to quitting jobs, quitting relationships.
Joe, what are your best reasons to quit?
I like creative liberation. We joked about TED Talks in our opening that we encourage people all the time to quit your job, go seek your creative dream, become self-actualized that way.
And we always roll our eyes because a lot of these people have dream jobs that
exactly.
Most people would kill for.
Yeah. Off air, Todd and I have talked about the jobs we've seen, the resumes of people who are doing these TED Talks, and the jobs before they, quote unquote, take a risk and throw it all out.
or the size of their trust funds.
Yeah, they're embarrassingly, wealthy. Like they have multiple layers of safety net before they, quit everything. So, but yeah, I like quitting for creative reasons. I think is a really, if you work at a laundromat or something, you have every reason in the world to quit and try something else. So when you're quitting to pursue something creative, we'll get into that when we talk about later how many millennials quit their jobs and why younger people are more likely to quit. Spoiler, they are. And it's mostly because they're pursuing something creative or something that will, when we say creative, we're just talking about something that will benefit them in the long term. Another good way to quit or good reason is burnout. Like you said, you're sitting in a parking lot, you can't push yourself to go into work, to cross that lot. So that's just straight up burnout. Another one that a good reason to quit is Iacocca. If you've been at something and you've gone as far as you can in your work field, and maybe you are like Iacocca being persecuted at your job, or you have somebody who is just not going to let you continue. That's a good reason to quit, I think. So, speaking of Iacocca, from that opening, I got a sense that Ford really actually had it out for him in a very in a way where he wasn't going to get out of it by sucking up to the boss or by making amends or diplomacy. So why did Ford have it out for him?
That's a great point, Joe. There was no way to win over Henry Ford II. He had a very strange upbringing. He had extremely paranoid and overprotective parents. There was a famous kidnapping, the Lindenberg kidnapping. It was a 12-month-old boy that got stolen from the crib and for ransom. And so the Fords were deathly afraid that this was going to happen to their little boy. So they had him with private security from a very young age, and he was hidden from the public. So he grew up kind of thinking he was pretty special and not like everybody else.
I could see that. If you're a kid and you have security guards guarding you, you might think you're something special.
And they think, and they're kind of put you in a case like you're a valuable ring or something.
Right.
Now the Ford family is absolute American royalty. They're old money. The Ford family still runs Ford, which to me was funny because Henry Ford was such a blue collar mechanic guy. So you wouldn't think that his family, that he would be this, I call it soft as a pillow.
Right.
Once you get past the old man.
Huh. It kind of flies against the tough car guy notion when you realize that this guy had guards around him and were delicately treating him at all times.
Henry Ford II, when he was at Ford, they said that being brought up like that made him kind of an exaggerated sense of his own importance, and this influenced all of his dealings and all of his management style. They said his executives, I'm not talking about the people, the lower, but the executives that work with him every day, every day of work went to work expecting to get fired.
Wow.
Eggshells. So you can imagine, you've worked your way up, you're at the top of the food chain in this big company, and you have to tiptoe around this kid who's a man now, who's firing everybody.
Right. You work your way up in life so that you are safer. So imagine getting to that pinnacle of your career and you are, always afraid of losing it. That's crazy.
And Iacocca works for Henry Ford II. Now, Henry Ford II, not only was he paranoid, not only was he a prince, but he was also very suspicious and insecure. So if he saw any of the executives talking about anything, he would go in there, interrupt them, pry himself into the conversation, and make sure that they weren't plotted against him. Can you imagine?
That's Game of Thrones stuff. That's medieval court stuff. That's crazy. So, I want to talk a little bit about hope and hopelessness when it comes to quitting generally. have you ever been in a situation where, like, you were ready to quit, but somebody took you aside and they talked you into continuing something?
Yes, we call it in my business getting put back together.
I like that. That's yeah.
Because you're all broken up. Like, let me tell you, everything's gonna be okay. Just do
Right,
this.
right.
This too shall pass.
Yes, stick it out. When we talk about quitting, there's a study I want to talk about. I didn't have to look this up. Well, I mean, like I refreshed myself on this study, but it's kind of famous. In fact, when I say it, some of our listeners will no doubt know about it already. It's called the mouse swim test. Have you ever heard of the mouse or the rat swim test?
No.
It's kind of super famous because it's cruel, and it's used by a lot of antidepressant companies to test hopelessness. So the test is and it was in an episode of Westworld. They talked about it. But the test is they will put mostly mice, sometimes rats, in a bucket of water, and they will watch how long they swim. And rats and mice, if they are hopeless, or I mean, like, if they actually have the emotion of hopelessness, they will give up and they will drown. But if they have hope, they will swim longer. So first,
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, that's why they use it in depressant tests, because a depressed mouse will die faster.
And that's how important hope is in our life, that we'll give up.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's so prevalent and it works so consistently that this is basically the gold standard of testing antidepressants. And with the mice, when they initially started doing these tests, they would test tank and homegrown mice, basically domestic mice, and they would test them against wild mice, mice that are caught and should be stronger, faster, more aggressive, better swimmers. And
survivalists. They have real survival skills.
Yeah, totally. Total, like field mice that are, total survivors. And they found that the field mice, because they hadn't been trained with humans, they didn't have reason to believe they would get out of this clear tank. They'd put the field mice in, who should survive longer. They'd die in minutes. They'd have the mice that were handled by humans that had grown up in a clear tank, so the basin of water is also clear, so they think there's a way out. Like, they're used to their own tank where they know there's a door or a way out, or somebody will eventually pick them up and take them out. So they'd put those mice, the trained mice, into these tanks. They'd swim for hours. So that little bit of hope, the idea that this might end, would keep them going longer. And it gets a little more sad if you're not feeling slightly depressed already.
Yeah, drowning animals, it's pretty sad.
Yeah. Well, like I said, this test is it's gotten notoriety because it is a little bit cruel. But they found out that they could keep them swimming even longer if they would take them out and handle them briefly and then put them back in. So giving them that much hope, it would increase their time. The longest I could find for how long they could keep mice swimming by giving them hope was days.
Wow.
So field mice will swim for a couple of minutes. If you give mice real hope that they'll get out of this, they'll do it for days.
This reminds me of my dating. Like, I'll go through these long droughts, and then I'll get a date with someone, and I feel a little bit loved and think, oh, maybe I have a chance. Right. And then I go back to the drought.
This test really, while reading about this episode in Iacocca, this mice swim test really, for me, felt like everything about quitting. Like, it encapsulated everything.
Well, it's what you just said. You're at work, and you're having these problems, and someone pulls you aside, and then keeps you going for. Your
handler takes you out of the water tank and says it's going to be all right for a couple seconds, and then you go back to swimming. I really don't want this to be our most depressing episode ever, but when we talk about quitting, we're going to get into how to productively quit, how to rechannel your energy. So please stick with us. If you've listened now for 20 minutes and you're thinking, oh man, this episode can't get good, there is light at the end. I promise you.
Can only get better.
Yeah. So that's my takeaway from reading this study. Is it kind of taught me be practical with yourself and your chances. Don't focus on the little moments of hope, the moments where somebody takes you out of your tank and comforts you. Instead, if you're just swimming in circles, like trying to look for a door out, just think about practical. What is giving you hope? Take solace in the moments that you have where somebody takes you aside and tries to help you, but always be real with yourself, I think is my takeaway for this. It also sounds to me when we were reading this narrative that Iacocca did that he, I mean, when Ford fired him, because I'm mentally a child, I would have flipped the table and threatened him and blown up. It would have been ugly. It would have been really ugly. But it sounds like Iacocca, he was able to rechannel that mastery a lot better.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about our hero here, Lee Iacocca. He was a true visionary. When he was at Ford, he was the leader behind the Ford Mustang. And he was one of the first guys to be interested in making a minivan and the Jeep Cherokees. Those are three huge monster hit American cars. In 1975, he had the vision that he wanted to put Honda engines. He was interested in buying Honda company and putting Honda engines in Fords. Can you imagine what that would have done to the car business if they would have gotten that quality? Because at the time, American cars were garbage. They were breaking down all the time. They were 2 miles per gallon. If you would have bought those Japanese cars, and there might not even be a Toyota today.
I've seen The Fast and the Furious, so I know American muscle beats everything every time, always. So you're telling me that at this era, Ford was putting out kind of junky cars?
Terrible cars.
Okay.
So the minivan was a huge hit for Chrysler, but it was actually an idea of a Ford engineer, and Lee Iacocca loved it, and he took it to Mr. Henry Ford II, and he shot it down.
Wow.
Now, we always like to tell the full story, so we don't want to build everyone up to say they never made any mistakes. Lee Iacocca was also in charge of a car called the Pinto.
Oh, God.
Do you know what a Pinto is, Joe?
There's a podcast called The Dollop. They have an episode on the Pinto, and it's a magnificent disaster of a car.
It was a piece of shit. It was a fuel-efficient death trap. I mean, they blew up.
Yeah.
So if you think cars, things are dangerous nowadays, he developed a car that just blew up, which is not good for business.
Our master engineer was behind the explodable car. So, okay, well, that gives us perspective. That lets us know that people make mistakes.
Now, Lee Iacocca, another strength he had, very few people can be an engineer and a salesperson.
Right.
They're either one or the other. They're two very different personality types. One's very analytical, and then one's very extrovert, outgoing, kind of like you and me.
Right. So Iacocca was both, apparently.
He was a master of both. And so he knew both sides of the manufacturing plant and the sales thing. So how valuable is that for a leader?
Right. A salesman who actually knows the stats on what he's selling. That's very comforting.
But when he maxed out at Ford and got fired, now he went to Chrysler. Now all his ideas got the green light instead of the red light roadblock.
Okay. So once you reach a mastery, we joked about soap carving. That was our joke mastery. But honestly, if you put in enough time at work to master something, when is it okay to quit and let that mastery rot?
Well, it's kind of like what you were saying. Like you've put so much time and money into this, you don't want to start over with something else.
Right. I've thought about in the past what happens if writing doesn't work out, because that's the one for me. Is I've put in well over the 10,000 or whatever. Is there something you've ever mastered where you put in a lot of time and effort and then you abandoned it?
I did. I had an industry that just kind of went away.
Okay.
That I was very vested in, just reps wise, and I knew it like the back of my hand. I knew the language fluently.
Yeah.
And then that job, it's still around, but there's less of it. It pays probably a third of what it used to pay.
Right.
And it's probably going to be gone totally in a few more years.
That's a really good example. I hadn't thought of that, but all the jobs that are being replaced by robots and automation, there are a lot of masters out there that just don't have a trade anymore. Like people who have put in their 10,000 hours, and there's nowhere to put that. There's no place that will use that skill anymore. So we're gonna talk a little bit about Malcolm Gladwell, and we're going to shoot him full of holes. So you and I have both read a lot of Gladwell.
We do. We've read his books. We watch his speeches.
Yeah. One of his books, he talks about mastery in the 10,000 hour mark. The idea, and because of his books, everyone is sort of picked up on that idea that it takes 10,000 hours to master something. If you haven't put in that time, maybe you're not a master yet. Or if you've put in that time, you can't help but be a master. That all you have to do is stick in it for that long, for 10 years or whatever, and then you'll have your mastery moment. I went looking for data to back that up, and it turns out chess champions and people who have achieved mastery in other fields. Chess is studied a lot. You ever notice how many of our podcasts chess comes up?
Yeah. It's a status thing for intelligence.
It is. It's a status for intelligence. And it also requires it's an objective measure. Like you can look at chess scores and you can see by the numbers who's a master and who isn't. So master chess players and master musicians are who we're talking about. You can go through and find masters who have only been doing it for a couple of years, who are far below that 10,000 hour mark. There's a website called Fast Company, and they are who I found this research from, but they link off to a couple of other college research articles. But they're the ones who posted an article that talked about all of these people who have achieved mastery in less time. And the best examples, the chess and the musicians, they found out that the 10,000 hours only accounts for about 1/3 of your mastery. So after reading Gladwell, I thought, time. All you have to do is invest time. Turns out age and when you pick up a skill and how many complementary skills you already have play a whole lot into it. So we're not going to get much deeper than that. I just wanted to bring up the notion that you may feel like you've mastered something. Like maybe you're the guy that puts the door on the Ford car and now a robot is doing that instead of you. You may have mastered that, but that means you can transition that skill. Hopefully, if you've put in that mastery hour, you can then take that elsewhere, and maybe you can put a hinge on a cabinet door.
Well, I always joke about this, and someone's been there. It's always the person, that guy or gal that says, pounds in their chest, says, I've been doing this for 20 years. And usually the people who say that, it doesn't show in their work or their attitude, Joe.
Right.
Yeah, and so like the guy can start working 6 months and be right up to speed with that person.
Yes. Yeah, so that's going to be something we hearken to a couple times in this episode, which is if you've mastered something, you can always transition away from it. And on top of that, be confident in your ability to master something new. If you go to work and you're worried that you'll get replaced, or you'll try something new, or you'll go to a new job and you'll lose all that old skill,
Tenure doesn't
master something new. What's that?
Tenure doesn't always equal talent.
Yes, Perfectly said. Have you ever heard of the book The Obstacle is the Way?
No.
It's a book about stoicism. It's similar to Gladwell's kind of stuff. Actually, it's pretty close to stuff by like Robert Greene, 48 Laws of Power, that kind of stuff. So it's self-helpy, but it's mostly focused on stoicism. And one of the stories they share in there is about the time Thomas Edison's factory burned down. So Edison was, at this point, an old man. Like, he was pretty much done with his career. And he was, ironically, trying to make fireproof concrete. And his factory burned down in the middle of the night. And he should have been, A, ready to retire, and B, stressed and pulling out his hair and, quitting. Like, it was really, we talk about Iacocca, there's no better time to quit. Same thing with Thomas Edison. His factory, taking everything with it, burning to the ground, should have just been it. Like, that should have been, okay, I'm done, pack it in. Instead, Edison turned to his kids and he said, go get the neighbors, go get our friends, bring everyone out here you can. This is going to be amazing. And they watched, because he knew there were so many weird chemicals they were working on and so many things in his factory that are going to produce light and flare, like fireworks.
Different colored explosions.
Exactly.
4th of July.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. Like it's going to be magnificent. So they watched like from afar as his factory burned down, and they're like, ooh, like they're watching it.
I'd be wrapped in a blanket crying. There's my life's work,
Right, yeah.
Unconsolable.
I'd be tearing out my hair. Instead, Edison is like, we're going to watch this. Get popcorn, yeah. So when a lot of this episode about quitting is actually really secretly about stoicism. It's how can we quit in a meaningful way that transitions our abilities to something new. So, speaking of transitioning to something new, I almost feel like that deserves like a snare-dum, the ba-dum-tsh. When Iacocca left, how did he transition his skills to something new? Like, what did he take on that was like his time at Ford?
Well, today we're all familiar with bailouts, and all the auto manufacturers have been bailed out in the last recession, but this was new. In 1979, Lee Iacocca, now he's with Chrysler, he's leading Chrysler. So he used his experience to get the same job at another manufacturer. But Chrysler was going out of business. They were bankrupt. They were flirting with bankruptcy. So he goes to Congress in 1979 and gets a bailout of $1.5 billion.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of money today. It was a lot of money in 1979. But there were a lot of, as Joe likes to say, I think, strings attached. They had to streamline a lot of their processes. They had to get their shit together. They also had to scrap some mechanical designs they'd been working on, some of them for 20 years. They had to say, okay, we're not going to let you keep losing money on stupid things that are never to come out.
Okay, so they got bailed out, but they really had to promise the public they were going to have something worthwhile at the end then.
Chrysler paid the loan back. And they set a standard in government that it's okay to bail out these major manufacturers that are it's going to affect the economy of our whole country.
Is that, I mean, I may be asking a question that we don't have answers for, but is that normal? Did the banks pay the money back when they got bailed?
All the auto manufacturers did. Yeah,
okay.
This was a different time because they're on their own. But think of all the big, great-paying jobs in Detroit and all over the world. I mean, all the dealerships, all the parts of the shipping companies. So he saved not just the company, but a good chunk of our country's economy.
Right, and our identity. I mean, like Detroit and the car manufacturing.
The big three.
Right. Yeah. That. I mean, that. You look at posters of 70s America, and it's cars. So, have you, speaking of the car industry and Detroit, have you seen pictures of Detroit today or in the last 10 years?
Oh yeah, it's beautiful downtown.
The renovated areas look really good, but there's there was a jokes online. People were posting pictures of the abandoned parts of Detroit.
Yeah, where you can buy a house for $500.
Right. Yeah, and it's just somebody posted in a forum. They're like, it looks like Fallout.
Yeah, not $500 a month. $500.
So when job markets go, like when job markets collapse, it takes out not just an industry like the car industry. It can take out lots of workers, lots of people's livelihoods. It can take out cities. Literally, cities can collapse when job markets go away.
Grocery stores, restaurants, everything goes when there's no jobs because everyone leaves. Abandoned.
Totally. Oregon, we're podcasting here from Oregon. We have lots of small towns that, like, when the mill left or when, like, whatever industry was keeping that town afloat, the town turns into a ghost town. Like, people, we've got several that just got burned in this latest set of wildfires. They had industries leave, and they the town itself was just sort of a figment of what it was. So, with that kind of job market where they can just sort of disappear, we have to be flexible as people, I think. And I wanted to look this up. If we're doing an episode about quitting, we had to ask the question, how many times will we quit in life statistically? Generally speaking, how many jobs can we expect to hold? So before I answer that question, I thought I'd embarrass you and me. I want to ask this. How many jobs have you held in your lifetime?
I'm just going to say it. It hurts, but I was at 30 plus.
30 plus. Do you think that's statistically high or low?
I think I'm bringing all the average up. I'm skewing the numbers.
I'm gonna overshare. I have had, I think 2 or 3 jobs, but that's with a caveat. I've had one job for about 20 years, but it's the same job at lots of different locations with the employer and the company has changed over time.
That means you've had one job.
Yeah, I've had one job that has changed its face and logo over and over and over again.
I actually respect that because when new bosses come in, they change things and they're not usually fair, and you persevered through it. So
yeah,
my hat's off to you on that one.
I work a job that is boring desk job, and I have kept it over the years because I literally do nothing at work, and it gives me all the time in the world to write and study, and that's what I'm in for. When I joked about the laundromat, I actually might as well work at a laundromat because that's basically the engagement my job has. So I'm statistically lucky.
Joe's smarter than the rest of us. He gets paid to follow his dreams, so I look up to you on that.
Oh, if only it paid enough to do anything else. I get paid peanuts, but I do get to write, which is fantastic. But I am statistically low on that average, and you are high on that average. The typical worker, according to USA Today, will have about 12 different employers in his or her lifetime. Younger workers are also statistically more likely to leave their jobs in search of better offers. And that's from data from Vizier. So generally speaking, if you can expect to have a job change 12 times in your life, that means flexibility is super important. So we joked about how people in TED Talks always tell you, quit your job, pursue your dreams. It's actually maybe a little bit more accurate to say, just expect to leave your job and not necessarily to quit your dream or to quit to pursue your dream. But just the flexibility of quitting and jumping on the next job, that itself might be more important than the skills at the job.
The book that popped in my head was Who Moved My Cheese? And what you're doing right now might not be viable at some point, or they may not just want you anymore.
Yeah. Now, we're gonna have a slight caveat to that. Mastery might be overrated for a job, but that's specific for a job. If you're mastering something that you enjoy, then it's something worthwhile because it will. You're more likely to remember things that you're mastering, and you're more likely to engage in it outside of a job if you truly enjoy it. So if you enjoy, say, cabinetry, and you've been doing that for a job, but you would do it even if you weren't getting paid, then continue, because that's the best kind of mastery.
Something you'll never get sick of, that you have a genuine interest.
Right. For me, obviously, writing. Like, I would do that without getting paid. So it's similar for everybody. Everybody's going to master something in their lifetime, whether they want to or not. But they can do it without being paid. I'm going to hearken to, this comes from a Forbes article, but this is an interview with Robert Greene. I've talked about Robert Greene before. He's very much a self-helpy guy. He wrote a book called Mastery, which is all about what we're talking about today. I'm just going to directly read this quote because I don't want to skewer it. So this is Robert Greene, author of Mastery. Quote, I had also worked as a consultant to many powerful people in the business and the arts. I had noticed that many of these successful people, historical and contemporary, shared certain common traits. They had a way of thinking that was exceptionally fluid. They could adapt to almost any circumstance. When confronted with problems, they could look at them from novel perspectives and solve them. They could do all of this with surprising rapidity, as if they had developed an intuitive feel for their work. So if you want, I don't know if there's a better way of saying simply that the ability to look at something and fluidly figure it out, rapidly adapt to it, and be flexible, that might be true mastery. So if you have mastered soap carving or cabinet making, you may want to master flexibility next.
That's very. I've always thought of it as being stubborn, and things are the way they are. But what you're saying is it's the opposite. You got to go with the flow and remain flexible in your approach.
Yeah, we should retitle this episode. Instead of saying quitting, this episode could just be called "How to Flexibly Transition Between Jobs," but that's a little bit lengthy for a title, so we'll go with quitting. So speaking of quitting. Can we talk about when Iacocca finally did throw in the towel? Because you have to at some point in your life, right?
Yeah, our hero, Lee Iacocca. So he was a huge hit at Chrysler. And when he retired, he became a symbol of national success. He was worth, we always like to talk about money because it's something we can measure, $150 million in 1992.
Dang.
And he was a celebrity because he did all the Chrysler TV commercials. So he was the face of the company.
There's something beautiful to that. Like he goes from Ford, where he is obviously being underutilized and thrown around. He is making improvements. He's behind the scenes. Ford is the face of Ford, obviously. And then he goes to Chrysler and he becomes their not just their leader, but their representation.
Now, how do you think that made them feel when they saw that he brought them back from and they have to see his face on TV grinning? That probably pissed the whole family off.
Right. I've never looked at Ford as being sort of like these nepotistic villains, but them staring and glaring at Iacocca's face on the TV, that there's beauty to that. I like that.
There's a sales trainer, and he's always talking to me about Lee Iacocca's wife. There's a famous sales quote, and she taunted him every time he was getting ready to give up, quit, or throw in the towel. Mm-hmm. And what she would always say to him, she kind of poke him with a stick and say, "Oh, Mr. Ford would love to hear that you're going to quit." And this would piss Lee off, and then he'd go back to work and keep on going.
That's awesome.
We usually don't do a lot of quotes. Joe did one, and I'm going to do one here because it's the same thing. I really can't say it. I can't really shorten it up, but I do want to leave with this quote from Lee Iacocca. And this is about him getting fired and what that meant in the trajectory of his career. Quote, "Well, I didn't plan it out that way, but by getting canned in 1978, I got thrown into a situation where I became a leader. You need to have a war to make general."
Awesome. I like that.
If you're stuck in a dead-end job and you know there's no place to go, no way to improve, no chance to get what you want, and the compensation isn't worth it, then quit. Stop swimming in circles. Be honest with yourself. Ask the hard questions. Do I have more bargaining power right now, behind my desk, or at my next job interview? Is my boss likely to let me advance? Or is he holding the position open for his son, whose name is on the building? Mastery is no safeguard. Becoming proficient at a skill is essential, sure, but companies already expect you to master whatever they sit in front of you anyway. If you take your valuable time to master something, choose a skill that's meaningful to you, because mastery isn't an equal playing field, and you'll learn faster and be less likely to quit if you master something that's meaningful to you. Lastly, the typical worker will have 12 different employers throughout their lifetime. For some of us, it'll be a lot more. This means your loyalty and time should be invested in yourself. Flexibility, education, fluidity, emotional stability, awareness. Those are the skills that will carry you should you decide to quit. Your loyalty should go to yourself, not your company. You are not a forklift rated for a certain load capacity each day to be taken out by your boss and used for specific purpose. Instead, we're all by necessity of the times and economy, Renaissance men and women, inventors, experimenters, and flexible learners, and we should damn well act like it. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to this show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
Connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com, where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for every episode. We also appreciate feedback. We love spirited debates. And tell us about a time you quit something. That would be fun.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.
And speaking of opinions on everything, I'm going to read someone's opinion that may inflate our ego, Todd. This is a review from a 5-star review on Stitcher for us.
Flattery will get you everywhere with us.
Absolutely. This is from Moxie. Moxie says, every episode was captivating. They should not be missed, but listened to with an intention to learn, grow, and glean from all the diligent work put into these podcasts. Joe is a brilliant researcher and writer. Todd is an interview with panache and has the ability to infuse the message brilliantly. Thank you very much, Moxie.
Very cool. We love you, Moxie. Thank you so much for the support. Very cool.
You. And if anyone else wants to leave us a 5-star review and make our ego any larger like this, we will read it on the show. Thank you very much.